Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Culture Hour. My name is Shelley Smith. I am your hostess with the mostest, and everything that we talk about here on the Culture Hour is absolutely workplace culture related. So if you have any information that you would like to gather, to give input on, we love the questions, the answers. We love the referral for people that you want me to interview, and obviously love all of the questions that you have and input around workplace culture. That includes turnover and retention and hiring and maybe a toxic manager, or how do we shift into forward feedback and everything that and above. But today our guest, and now let's see if I can get the name right again. I always have to see I said it right. Just so you guys know, we're actually re-recording because of a hic on my side. So Brenda Neckvatal
Yep.
actually came to us. Brenda and I go back a little bit. We both were working with the Honor Foundation, helping really Navy SEALs, special ops do a transition out of their military careers into what do they do after life. And that's actually where Brenda and I first met. She's an incredible human being that I began to stalk a little bit. She's got a new, now you know.
Now I know.
Now you know. She's got a couple of new podcasts that she's going to tell you about, but I actually have seen and watched her lately and ran into her at a recent event and said, oh my gosh, you've got to come on the show because we definitely have like conversations that we could talk about. So let me introduce to you Brenda. Brenda is the president of Best Practices, and she's launched two new two new podcasts recently that she can tell you a little bit more of. She's called the HR Lady. So if you want to go on Twitter and pull up some of her feed and past posts, you can do that, as well as the HR Force of Nature. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Brenda. So Brenda, why don't you tell the group a little bit about your background and what brought you into the podcasting world and your own HR consulting that you're in today. So I do know that you started in the retail line.
Yes.
And on our first recording, you actually was talking about all of the different aspects. And so if you could tell the audience about that and then move it
Yeah.
into your early 2000 HR and where you are today.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I actually started, I have a very lengthy career. First off, I want to thank you. And we did this on the first go around. I almost forgot to do this on the second one. So I thanked her the first time. Now I'm going to thank you again. If that isn't a big ego stroke, I don't know what is, but thank you for having me on board. This is a real thrill. It's a lot of fun working with you over at the Honor Foundation, and I have an absolute blast. So, I did start in retail. So I have a very lengthy 30-year retail career. If you want to know anything about business, if you want really good business experience, go into retail management because you learn everything. You learn everything from sales. You learn finance. You learn maybe not so much financial management, but you learn aspects of it.
Yeah.
You learn marketing, you learn operations, you learn, risk management, you learn safety, you learn human resources stuff, you learn, and that's usually, shooting out at you by a cannon, but you learn how to recruit, you learn how, loss prevention. So you really get a really good 360-degree touch on business in general. And I really liked the HR side of it. I was doing the HR work without realizing I was doing HR work, but I was doing all those other things that I listed too.
Yeah.
And so in 2001, after taking about a 6-month hiatus, the company that I was working for at the time, it just went out of business. I took a break because I was fried. I was in management, and I just said, I just want to work. And I just want to work. That's all I want to do. So I was hired on by CarMax in 2001. Probably my greatest mentor still is over there. He's a regional vice president. I actually wrote about him in a book that I wrote called Holy Cow, I Have to Talk to My Boss. And and it's going out tomorrow, so he's going to get it soon. But I wound up doing some stuff with him. I was kind of backing the HR person up a little bit in certain areas, and I got a glimpse into it. I really liked it. So I became officially an HR sprout, so to speak, in doing so, and then progressed into the actual position in 2002. And it was really great because I hadn't gone back to school at that point. I was still still didn't have finished my college degree. I had started it, but I hadn't finished it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the benefit of really it was a magic combination. I mean, talk about the stars and the moon aligning, right? So I got the benefit of doing the work as an influencer in the store. At the time, we had about 218 employees.
Hmm.
We had all the activities that you would need to do in HR, but I had no decision making capability. But if I needed to, I could sign in and return, a $25,000 vehicle if I needed to. It's really kind of interesting. So we have access and ability, but we don't have authority and permission. It was really interesting. But my job was the troubleshooter, right? And I also, just naturally who I was, the Tom actually started utilizing me as the morale booster a little bit. So one of the things that was the biggest morale booster was every payday I would walk around the store 3 times. We had 3 shifts working around the clock, and I would hand out people their paychecks. And in doing so, people would say, "Hey, listen, I got a quick question for you," or "Hey, listen, I can't find this," or "Hey, listen, this," and I would be able to tell him what kind of pulse of the issues were going on in the store. He absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So when I told him I wanted to go back to school and become, finish my degree and pursue human resources, he told me I didn't need to do it. And I said, well, that's really funny because all the other HR people over here are telling me that that's what I need to do. So even though I believe you,
Uh-huh.
um, but that's what I did. He eventually moved on. I worked with some other really great leaders that gave me opportunities. Eventually I went to the corporate office. So what was really cool is that starting in 2001 was really an onset of a change in progressive HR.
Hmm.
So I came from a background growing up where, if you don't like the door, there it is. If you
Yeah.
don't want to get the work done, there it is.
Yeah.
Here and in the 70s and 80s, it was about really it was about being a personnel manager, and it was more of the administrative and tactical side of making sure that stuff got done. And then when progressive HR really started coming into the play, it was taking into account an individual's level of engagement, job satisfaction. We saw a massive boom in technology. We started,
Yeah.
seeing things called an HRIS, which is Human
Hmm.
Resource Information System. We started taking applications online. We
Hmm.
started doing not performance-based evaluations online, although that did come a little bit later. But then we were doing, applicant assessments online.
Hmm.
And now we introduce IO psychology and
Yeah.
validated tests. So
Yeah.
it was really neat. So by the time I did go back to school, I started back in 2005. I transitioned to the corporate office down in Richmond, Virginia, from the chilly winter of Wisconsin, and worked at the corporate office for 3 years. So I was with CarMax for 8 years. And I really got a chance to see a lot of different things on the back end. But then I was also able to pull in my experience as being a field associate. And I
Yeah.
can tell you right now that in retail, field employees and corporate employees, 2 completely different cultures under
Yeah.
one big corporate culture,
Yes.
because the dynamics of their environment are very different.
Yes.
And that was something very difficult for people to understand at the corporate office. Conversely, it was difficult for people to understand why people at the corporate office didn't understand people in the field. So there's always this there's always this back and forth. It's like
Yep.
the same dilemma that occurs between sales and service. So it's always going to
Yep.
be there. One will
Absolutely.
never fully understand the other, right?
Absolutely.
No matter how hard they try. So, so I graduated with a bachelor's in human resource management and a leadership, a minor in leadership in 2009 from the University of Richmond. The week that I graduated, CarMax decided to do a downsize, so they eliminated 128 some positions
Oh my
and
gosh.
added only like 32. So it was, I got my notification on Tuesday. I had people flying in on Thursday to walk across stage on Saturday. So
Wow.
and so now this happened right when the economy was crashing. I mean, it was
Yeah.
crashing at this point. We
Yeah.
had already seen, President Bush at the time had already signed off on several bailouts. The economy was still sliding downwards. So it was the time when 10% of the workforce now all of a sudden didn't have a job. I was one of those 10%. So I was the
Yeah.
early adapter, right?
Yeah.
But I was smart because I paid attention to what was going on and I saw the writing on the wall a year ago.
Mhm.
I wound up talking to a friend of mine who was a district manager over at PetSmart, and he says, "Look, I'm going places. I want you to be my HR director." I was like, "Fantastic! I'm still
Mhm.
employed." And he goes,
Yeah.
"Yeah, well, I'm not. He said, I'm not a regional VP yet, so that works out great."
Yeah.
And so we always had this plan that the day that I knew that I was going to be released, to call him
Mhm.
up and we'd put our little plan in motion. So I joined PetSmart, and I joined PetSmart as an ops manager.
Gotcha.
We had a district of 11 people.
Mhm.
Oddly enough, we had to put our friendship on hold. Well, it was a smart thing to do. And I was responsible for the entire district's safety program,
Mhm.
because I had experience of working with the balance between the corporate office and what was going on in the field. So
Mhm.
I did that job for 2 years. I went over to ADP. So that was my fourth Fortune 500 company, was PetSmart, and then
Mhm.
ADP was my fifth.
Mhm.
I went over there 2 years later, became a human resource consultant, and eventually a senior human resource business partner in less than a year and a half with
Mhm.
ADP. And that's where I got to do a lot of hands-on working with the CEOs, having a seat at the table. My book of business over the year, I mean, just that job alone contributed to over 300 companies.
Gotcha.
So in 5 years, to be able to touch 300 companies, you see a lot of different things done a lot of
Mhm.
different ways.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so that's the short version.
Oh my. Oh my. Well, I want to dive into a couple things. I know you still have other things going on and where you are today, but
Yeah.
I took some notes when you were talking. I want to talk on three things. You talked about the retail side, which I completely agree. My daughter is my middle child's actually an intern this summer. She's a management
Hmm.
major out at Virginia Tech, and she is doing retail internships with Targets. And
Oh,
so
good company. Yeah.
just it's first of all, it's an amazing and they're not sponsoring this podcast, but they do have an amazing internship program. I'm pretty
Yeah.
impressed with what it is that they're doing, but it brought me back to my early retail days when I was just working. And you're right, everything about retail is every single aspect of it. And she's already come back to me, and because they let her go through each department and each piece, and is
Yeah.
living out everything that you're talking about. But she's already starting to see very quickly, even though she's only like 4 weeks in, the things that she likes and what's gravitating her towards. And
Yep.
interesting enough, it is the HR side, and I'm getting a big kick out of that. But um, but you're right, having that scope, I think, is huge. So I
Hmm.
wanted to talk about something that you said specifically there. We're going to come back to that. But you talked about the fact that when you were handing out the payroll checks and
Hmm.
people coming in with their miscellaneous pieces, that you were able to listen, watch, learn, and take it back to upper management and to have that different perspective. So I think that that's huge and key. And it's an element that I want to dive into from culture. Then you talked about the turn and the evolution of the AI piece, so the HRS systems of the world.
Hmm.
And so obviously there's more and more being discussed about automation in HR, as well as obviously
Yep.
other dynamics. But I would love to talk to you about the human side that is still going to have to remain. And I don't know about you, but for me, I love the fact that the automation is taking away things that are far more tactical that we need to be able to analyze. But we do have to get back to the human side. That's
Hmm.
why the HR element was there to begin with. So I have a different view on it, that I'm actually happy to see some of that coming. And then you talked about subcultures. So I want to talk about that as well, because many
Yeah.
times people get confused on climate versus culture, and they
Yep.
think that the culture is the culture synonymously through the entire either walls of the company, inside the departments, and you're right, out in the field, and that is wrong, wrong, wrong. So you can have pillars, but there's absolutely, when you have a fleet, so to speak, you're absolutely going to have subcultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's going to happen because anytime you have people, you're going to have cultures. So
Yeah.
those are the three things I would love to unpack. So
Sure.
first, I want to come back and talk about maybe a couple of tips that you can give to the viewers and the listeners around the importance of never losing grip on the day-to-day operations and what the team members at every level are thinking, feeling, asking, seeing, and how over the years for you, you've been able to bring those perspectives back
Yeah.
to the leaders in the Fortune 500 companies and to make something happen. So are there some tips around on both sides, giving the employees the courage to have the conversations and then the managers the ability to listen? I would love to hear your view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was over at CarMax, I've seen this now twice over at CarMax and over at PetSmart. Both really great companies. I still buy my cars from CarMax actually. Um, but so one of the biggest questions is, you know, it's hard, and at the time CarMax was just a much smaller company than what it is today. I mean, when I was there, when I left, it was about 100 stores. They were just ramping up their growth, and we just got done settling a brand new CEO.
Okay.
So the company as a whole went through a shift because the captain is now no longer there. It's a new captain at the helm, and it was
Mm-hmm.
the executive officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now he's in place, and he's a very different guy than the prior person. So
Mm-hmm.
I can speak for myself that, there were elements of the culture that I didn't expect to change, and there were elements of the culture that I expected to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I was caught off guard with the elements that I didn't expect to change. Now, it wasn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't the same as what it was I thought it was. And personally, it dropped my level of engagement a little bit, but it still wasn't bad. I was still in there doing my job. I didn't hate going to work or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a line of delineation for me between absolutely loving what I do and
Mm-hmm.
just enjoying what I do.
Let's unpack
And
that.
there's my dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
And
you'll hear her. She's big.
just well, let's unpack that a little bit. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about what those subtle or directly those changes were?
Well, both of the leaders were very approachable. Neither one
Okay.
wasn't approachable. One was more adamant about every day being visible to
Mm-hmm.
employees. The other one didn't have a problem with it, but
Mm-hmm.
he didn't push that mindset. Make
Okay.
sense?
Yes.
And that was a change that I didn't expect because I
Okay.
thought it was embedded into the culture at that point.
Gotcha.
And that's a leader's preference right there.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, I actually did a white paper on I had to do it. I had to do it on a leadership trait, and I did it on the study of charisma, which was a really difficult project. It wound up being something like a 35-page uh, report that I did. Like a
What were
300
you
level class.
thinking?
There was a lot of data that had to go into it.
Yeah.
And a matter of fact, I reformulated the white paper to talk about it. And although I've changed the names and identities of those who I studied, it
Mm-hmm.
identified specific characteristics of somebody who is, naturally charismatic,
Yeah.
and how charisma is actually used in leadership based off of specific distinctions that formulate the definition. Because charisma is one of those things where you know it when you see it, but it's kind of hard to define. So
Yes.
I put a definition to it, right? Um, so um, so taking a look at the culture from an academic standpoint was, it was fun. It was enlightening. I don't know too many people would call it fun, but it was very enlightening,
Mm-hmm.
because it was applying towards my own development of my own leadership style, my own growth, and what it is that I wanted to, what my legacy would have been, in the future when I started taking a seat somewhere.
Right.
So that was really interesting. And then, the dynamic of a corporate office is going to be much different than the dynamic of, your client facing
Right.
employees and your client facing group, right?
Right.
So employee service exists in a corporate office, at the corporate office,
Mm-hmm.
for internal clients,
Mm-hmm.
which is the field.
Mm-hmm.
So, but your field employees are your client facing, team.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'll throw this out there, our definition of what customer service is today is vastly different than what it was in 2008, what it was
Absolutely.
in 2001, what it was in 1989 when I graduated from high school. See, I gave you guys a date, so you can do the math now. And
Absolutely.
then 1985, 1970 something or other, it
Yes.
1942. It's
Yeah.
all vastly
Well,
different.
and
And
that's
so,
the leadership piece that goes along with each of those as well. Like, I want to pull you back into
yeah,
the charisma comment
yeah,
because actually I like that. So when the differences in charisma, if you will, you saw taking place between top leadership, the differences and the changing in the guards, what impact did that say? You talked about it personally for you, that you went from a high level engagement to just, the engagement piece. Talk to me a little bit more about how did you field, because I'm sure people came to you as well to talk to you, right, about the differences. How did
not
you field
really.
that? No, they didn't?
No, not
Okay.
really. Not in the position that I took. But what
Okay.
I mean, well, first off, when you've got a major change in companies, you know, there's there's this kind of facade that exists out in this digital world that we have, that when things change, it's this massive upheaval, right?
Mhm.
And things get flipped upside down, and they kind of do to some point. But when you're in a corporate environment and you get her that's a helm, they took that seat today.
Mhm.
Well, tomorrow it's still business as usual. It
Right.
has to be, because all those things are still currently in place. Just because we have
Mhm.
new leaders in place doesn't mean our SOPs immediately change in 24
Right.
hours or a week or a month.
Right.
Um, it means that strategic direction is changing
Correct.
and vision is changing.
Mhm.
And it's those things that impact what an individual's perception is. And
Okay.
in the book that I wrote, there's 4 different laws or 4 different rules. And the first rule is that your boss is going to have more problems than you, guaranteed, all the
Yes.
time.
Yes.
Well, imagine that as a CEO.
Mhm.
So the CEO has the most of anybody in any company.
Mhm.
And the fourth rule is that if you won't be part of the problem for very long. Is going to take care of their problems.
Yes. Yes. Amazing how that works out, right?
That's right. The second rule is that problems are always based on money,
Mhm.
always. And
Mhm.
in HR, I can
Mhm.
quantify anything in a company. I
Yep.
can quantify time. I can do time studies. I can quantify everything,
Right.
everything, human capital and everything, right?
Mhm.
And then the third rule is that if you don't understand, if it's not a money issue, if you don't understand it's not a money issue, and if you're contributing to, if you don't understand it, you're contributing to the problem. So
Yes.
yeah, so those are 4 major categories that I talk about. But that's exactly what happens to any shift in dynamic. And when you look at the dynamic change curve, when you have forming, storming, norming, and performing,
Yeah.
it's the exact same thing, and everybody's going to go through it, and they're all going to feel it. Some
Mhm.
people feel it at different paces than others, and that impacts culture. Some people feel it together, and that impacts culture.
Yep.
Some people don't feel it. Departments won't even feel it at the same time, because maybe the strategic focus initially is a change in financial management, or
Mhm.
it could be a change in marketing structure and marketing campaigns, and so those teams are going to feel it. So therefore, that's when silos start popping up, is
Mhm.
because everybody's focusing in on what they need to focus in on, and we as human beings have a tendency to start thinking, okay, so this is what I'm focusing in on. My support mechanism, my support networks are not on the same page. So
Right.
that means one of two things. Either I work to get them on the same page, which ideally is the best way to go,
Mhm.
but their objectives may not be the same either. Their priorities are going to be different. So that's the puzzle. That's the formula you got to figure out. How can I get that team who historically supports me, and I need them to support me,
Mhm.
on my page? And
Mhm.
conversely, what can I do to help them accomplish their goals? Because this even exchange of help,
Mhm.
amazing. It's amazing how far things go, right?
Yeah.
It also puts more work on your plate, but it's worth it in the end.
Mhm. Which
And
which
then
comes. Go
and
ahead.
then the other piece is that if that doesn't happen, well, now we get tunnel vision and these silos come up. And now it's look, and it's like I have all of this that I have to deal with. And if you're not willing to help me, you now no longer are anything of value for me. I got to focus in on this.
Mhm.
Well, they may be looking at you as a support mechanism, but they may
Mhm.
not be able to support. So it's kind of like, we have to take the mindset of me out of thinking sometimes and really look at the big picture. And I think there's an element in place right now in today's workforce where that is no longer being influenced. It's not as taught, and there's a lot of people that complain about millennials because millennials look at life a certain different way. It's not bad, but here's the other piece of it: is that those millennials who are now going into leadership positions are now learning those lessons that we've been in existence with for a long time. So
Mhm.
now they're taking hits in the chops, but they're bringing different types of perceptions and views and experiences to the table to move things forward.
At which every generation has and does, and
Yeah.
I don't think that millennials, um, I always get, a lot of looks when I say this, but millennials just want things faster than we did. It's if my parents had not reinforced that you don't, job hop, that it's all about steady and consistent. I, as soon as I started working for Marriott, I'm like, what do I need to do to get promoted? I may not have articulated it the same way, but I definitely took action. They're
Yeah.
just articulating it quicker. They don't want anything different than what I have wanted my entire career. We just have taught them, each generation has taught the next generation to speak up and to be able to communicate and ask what it is, and that nothing should hold you back. but
Right.
but the other part of this is the technology piece, which, pulling into the AI piece, the
Yeah.
more we have access to everything like this, why would we not want everything now? Hence, this is why, we're talking about the millennials. I've got two millennials and I've got one in the Z generation, and the Z generation wants it even faster. So there's an
Yes.
8-year gap, and
Yes.
everything is why not now? Why not now? I mean,
Yeah.
literally everything. So, the poor millennials, just wait, people. The next generation, the Z workers, are going to be something else. So we'll be able to shift and start. The millennials will finally get a break, and then they're going to start talking about the Z
Yeah.
generation, and inside of that. So
It,
we're going to have to put a wrap on our conversation,
no
just
problem.
because I always tell the viewers that it can easily consumable and not actually an hour. So what I would like to do is I would like to have a couple things from you. Is there
Sure.
a favorite book, or quote, or kind of your tip or mantra that you live by or you recommend? And then give us the best way that people can contact you, follow you, and to find out more information about yourself, your business, and your podcast. So first, what is it you want to tell the audience as a final takeaway?
Well, man, we covered so much.
We did, and that's
Oh
when I was
my
like, oh,
gosh.
the time, yeah.
I
And we
know.
didn't even get to two things. You'll have
I
to
know,
come
but
back
that's
on.
okay. Well, yeah, I'll be happy to come
Sure.
back. I'd love this stuff. So I would say, based off of what we talked about today, and I'll tell you my number one rule in life, and I had a
Okay.
boss that taught me this. I don't think he really fully understood how much it impacted my world, but in the absence of information, people make stuff up.
Oh
Human
yes,
beings do not do well with not knowing or having a justification as to why something is.
yes,
So why not be very clear in your communication behind it, right?
yes, yes.
So, and that also goes true with, in the HR field, is that, when you're looking at a situation, we instantly make judgments based off of only what we perceive is going on and not actually go deeper into the subject matter to understand it. So when somebody's showing up late and they show up late consistently, well, we
Mhm.
automatically think that they're a bonehead because
Yeah,
they can't seem to get here on time, right? So that's our
yeah,
justification. And
yeah,
we all do it, right?
right.
Even me, who lives and dies by this rule, I still am, just as a human being, am wired to make that decision. However, I'm very quick at turning around and wondering, okay, so what's going on? Why is this actually happening? I'm not afraid
Yeah.
to ask the question, have the conversation with the person, and you may actually learn that they're probably caring for an ailing family member, or there's something bigger than what's out there. So we
Exactly.
tend to get very snappy and very judgmental. So
Hmm.
I challenge everybody on this planet
Hmm.
to be mindful about being snappy and judgmental, and remember that there's always more to what the story is on the surface. So,
Absolutely.
and
I,
if
I
you
agree.
guys,
But
yeah, and if you guys ever want to have those kinds of conversations with me, and you guys are welcome to find me. I'm I'm the only Brenda Neckvatal in the country, so it's really hard
Really?
to miss me. I know, right?
You've been blessed with, I have the generic name. I tell my husband all the time that of course, Shelley Smith is an ESPN person. So usually when you look that up, that's what you get.
Yeah, you
Um,
get.
but I
That's
told my
right.
husband I was marrying him early on when we were dating, because my main name is Gross, Groce. And of course, I
Yeah.
grew up in the area of everything was ooh, gross. And so
Ew,
I was
gross,
quick to
man.
get rid of that name. But probably
Yeah.
if I would have kept that, I could have been easier found. At any
So,
rate,
so they can find me at on the website at bestpractices.org. You
beautiful.
can find me on Twitter with my name, Brenda Neckbottle, although nobody knows how to spell it, and that's fine. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Best Practices in HR. So
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I definitely think that our conversation, even though we kind of went in different pieces, it does boil down to communication. And I always
yeah,
say communication is the king and the queen of everything. And I am one to be, sometimes I'm a little bit too transparent and honest in my demeanor outward. Everybody kind of knows what I'm thinking, but I would rather have truth and transparency myself. So I always try to give that. And I do think a lot of our woes and our misinterpretations of things could have been stopped and paused if we just would have had
yeah.
better communications and to be able to look at the other side. So as you said, so I completely agree and absolutely love that. So again, thank you so much, Brenda, for being on today. For those
Oh,
of
my
you
pleasure.
watching, you're going to be able to see Brenda's information scrolling on the bottom of the screen. And for those of you who are listening, you can go deeper in and look at that as well. And of course, you heard Brenda talk about how to contact. And again, my name is Shelley Smith. I'm your proud host and founder of the owner of Premier Rapport and the Culture Hour hostess. And I thank you for listening and watching and viewing. Keep submitting your questions because I love getting that type of engagement going. So until then, remember, culture matters, and have a fantastic day.